This is going to be Panic versus Ruin, a PvP. This is from GSL, as you guys can see there on the screen. And you might be wondering who these two guys are. They're two kind of mid-level Protosses that hit each other in the round of 32. I don't think either one of them actually made it out of this group. But still, there's a lot of games here that you can learn from that are pretty interesting to watch as well. And I typically try to choose games that are not like overly standard, boring things that you're going to see in every single game. But they'll be pretty close to standard, so you can still learn something from it and apply it to your own games, regardless of what strategy you're running. So we can see the game is loading up right now, Ruin versus Panic. And again, it's PvP, so since we're taking a look at this from the Protoss perspective, we can look at both players, so we'll get twice the amount of information we normally would. And I need to do several things to make this more easy to view, such as sound and music and setting the colors correctly. So okay, we have Panic. He's the blue Protoss up here at the top. He plays for StarTales. We can see their little logo that they have in GSL a lot of the time. And his opponent's Ruin. He plays for IM. Ruin especially is somebody I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of in PvP because he has really intelligent strategies in PvP. Not so much in this game, but there are some games where I see him play PvP and I'm like, wow, this is something that nobody is doing and something that's really, really smart. So we'll see more of him in the future. This game is going to be mostly about how to handle your army and how to hit certain timings throughout the game. It won't be too much about, like micro or things like strict build order counters and stuff like that, which you can see a lot in PvP. But both of these guys will open with something relatively safe, and it is something that you can copy in your own games, which we will see come up here in just a second. Now, most of the time in PvP, your opener is going to be determined by when and how quickly, or rather, when and how many gases you get. So, a lot of times people will take 2 gases before their second pylon, and some of them mine with 2 in each gas, and some will mine with 3 in each gas. It's just up to you and what kind of tech your build demands. So higher tech builds like Stargates, or rather more gas intensive I guess I should say, will require 2 gas before pylon. So we'll have to see what each of these guys do. So both of them do start their first gas. Sometimes you can get your second gas after core if you're doing something more like Blink or even more rarely Robo, but that's almost never seen. You can see both of them do take double gas before their second pylon. The second pylon starting for both players once as well, or at least Ruin should be starting here any second, right? Yeah, almost late on that, so you need to be a little careful about that. He might actually have a gap in his SCV, or rather his pro production because of that. So both players mining gas right now. You can see 3 on each for Ruin, and only 2 out of 3 on each for Panic. So this can be a couple of things. It can be like a gateway pressure if you see 2 out of 3. It can be something like Blink that's a little more conservative. But from Ruin, it's looking more like something like Stargate. So that's definitely possible. But you do need to tailor your gas mining based upon what type of open you're running. And of course you can scout your opponent and see what their gas mining is like and try to make assumptions based on that. So yeah, the 2 out of 3 on each gas does make sense for a double gateway opener here from Panic. And this is about as safe as you can be in PvP from Panic's perspective. The double gateway is going to be for faster stalkers. He's going to get them 2 at a time and usually just get out 3 and then decide what to do. On the other side, Ruin's going for a sentry first. And I'm not sure what his tech is supposed to be, but if you can click on the geysers as you're scouting, you can see how much gas has been mined. So these top level pro players can see, okay, I know you've been mining with 3 on each gas for this long because I've been playing this game so much. You can kind of get hints yourself from that type of thing as well. But the double gateway opener is going to be super safe here out of Panic. You'll be able to start stalkers 2 at a time and then kind of make decisions on what to do after he gets those up. So the build is actually going to be a sentry into Twilight Council, which is fairly unusual. I guess it'll be for Blink and to protect against type of like gateway aggression. You can use that sentry to force field the ramp and maybe to scout a little bit later on. So this is a fairly safe build as well from Ruin. And he actually has a 3rd gate coming up. So this is going to be some type of Blink aggression, hopefully here out of Ruin. So let's say you're doing something like Blink, like Ruin is doing now. You want to try to tailor it to the map that you're using. So the reason that this map is good for Blink is because if you get into an engagement down here, you're just steps away from blinking into the main and doing some damage over here instead, and there's still plenty of room to run away and blink out somewhere if his army reports in time. So that's the reasoning that he has behind that. But Panic is, interestingly enough, going for a Stargate, which is actually proxied. So this is another good way to diffuse the blink plays or aggression from your opponent in PvP. especially, is just to put on some sort of Oracle aggression and force them to keep units back at home so that their pushes are not as strong at your base. So Ruin getting this Scouting Phoenix out here, going to figure out everything that's going on at a pretty decent time as well. And Panic, I think, knows that it's Blink, considering his Mothership Core was in there. So he should have seen the Twilight Council spinning. His response is going to be an immediate Robo, but he's still making the Oracles. So this is kind of two-sided. On one side, he can hold against the Blink with the Immortals that he can be able to get out, or he should be able to get out. And secondly, he's forcing units to stay home. So Panic knows that he's safe on several levels here. But more importantly, Ruin actually does have a Nexus coming down. So Panic definitely needs to make sure that he understands what's going on with that, so he can respond in time. The Oracle is going to come in here, and like I said, it forces him to keep units at home so that you're safe back at your own base. And if you micro this Oracle well, you should be able to kill a decent number of probes and still get out of there. Yeah, you can see his control is good. He does get 4 workers there basically for free. He keeps himself safe. And now all of a sudden the faster Nexus for Ruin doesn't matter as much because Panic can figure out that he does have a Nexus down and just put down his own as soon as he would like. So, both these players in pretty good spots right now. The Immortals are on the way for Panic, so he shouldn't die to any sort of blink timing or anything like that. And at the same time, the blink timing really shouldn't be an issue, but Panic really needs to affirm that there is a Nexus here, and he has no idea. Just flying the Oracle around, he should see, and that should prompt him, yeah, okay, he's already taken his own Nexus anyway, but he should know to take his own Nexus right away anyway. So, PvP is very strange in the early game. As we can see so far, from Panic's perspective, he was seeing a build that was fairly aggressive. 3-gate blink is pretty strong if you don't have a good counter against it. But his goal was to try and keep units in the main by building a Stargate, and then to build Immortals behind it to hold against any potential blink play. So you can also see he's dumping Chrono into that Immortal as well. So he should be able to get Immortals on the field quickly enough to the point where it won't even matter how many Blink Stalkers he has. If he decides to be aggressive, there should be enough Immortals and support to be able to push that away. So you'll also notice that if you're facing a Blink build, he's keeping his units over here on the ramp, so that if his Nexus gets attacked over here, he can defend with his units by just walking over there. But if he gets into the main and the opponent blinks up there, his units are just steps away from that as well. So you kind of want to hover between the two bases if you're facing somebody that likes to use blink openers. Forge for both of them is a big deal. The faster forge you can get in PvP, the better off you're going to be in the mid game, especially if you're trying to hit a timing. So you need to get that forge spinning right away, especially if you build it right away. He has the money for it too. I don't know what his attention is being devoted to right now, but there's no reason not to start that. And yeah, he starts it now, so finally getting on top of that. But the faster forge player will usually have the better army overall. So the faster you can squeeze your forge out and your openers, I mean, you really need to find a way to get that out ahead of your opponent in some way. So if you can affirm that they're just building probes back at home, or if you can kind of harass them and double check that, then getting a faster forge up is going to mean that you're going to have a lot more opportunity for winning army fights when you otherwise probably shouldn't. So Mortal's still being incremented out here. You can see he's still splitting his units up just a little bit because he doesn't want to get multi-pronged by any blink stuff. So he has about, half his army over here and at least a decent enough amount of mortals to where blink won't matter. So by this stage of the game, let's say we're the blink player. You don't want to continue making blink stalkers because they're going to be worse and worse as the game goes on. They will die to a lot of things like Immortals, Charge Zealots, Colossus, basically anything that the opponent can field and that they will field. The Stalkers are going to be incrementally more useless. So the only point of the build here from Ruin so far was to start Blink, see what he could get done with that if there were ever any opportunities for that. But as soon as he realized there wasn't, he just expanded and he kept his Stalkers back at home to try and catch Oracles with this Blink. So this Blink wasn't aggressive. He just wanted to be sure that he wasn't going to die to anything. But you'll notice that he's not continuing to make Stalkers because, like I said, they just get worse as the game goes on. So from this point now, both players are going to want to be looking about or looking at what are their options for the mid and late game. Either you can go for some type of Colossus-based composition, or you can go for some sort of Immortal Archon type of composition. And as we've seen in the past, the higher Immortal count, if you're going Immortal Archon, is going to be stronger. So both of them adding on Templar Archives right now. But because the faster Robo was in favor of Panic, he should have an Immortal lead by this point. You can see it's actually 4-2, 4-3 now as one just finishes for Ruin. But the big deal is that the immortal count being higher for one player or the other is going to kind of determine how these battles go, especially if it's an identical composition. So what we're seeing now here out of Panic, I'm sorry, is a Warp Prism. And this is kind of why I wanted to show you guys this build, because there's a lot of opportunity here with Warp Prisms and multi-pronging, especially with the Mothership Core, that I feel are really overlooked in PvP right now. So what you can do, what he may try to do, is just load up some units, drop them here in the main. As soon as the enemy army reports, so they head over here and try to stop the drop, you can just come over here and kill the Nexus and then recall. And the third base timing is really centralized around things like that. So if you take a third base, a lot of times you could just die to an all-in if you're already behind. But if you take a third base, most of the time you should be safe, assuming your upgrades are equal and your composition is good. But if you can't deal with a drop like this, and they just come over here and multi-prong you, then all of a sudden you're going to be way behind. Their third Nexus should be getting going here any second, yeah. So you might say, oh, they're both going third Nexus, and it looks like Ruin has a big advantage because this is way earlier, but these multi-pronging things are going to be a big deal if you can't deal with those properly. So from the perspective of Ruin, if you're going to be taking a third base and your opponent is being a little bit more passive, you need to examine and see if that third base ever goes down. If it does, or if you can ever spot a Warp Prism, you need to put cannons here in your main to defend against little harassments like that. So what I was describing that entire time is basically going to happen now. So we can see the Warp Prism coming in here, loaded up with 4 Zealots. He drops off those Zealots, and you can get an immediate, huge warp in, and it'll also force an overreaction from Ruin. You can see his armies in no man's land because he saw Panic's army moving out. So Panic getting in outstanding positions here can probably easily kill this Nexus and recall. But at the same time, look at how much damage is being done here in the main of Ruin as well. If you're Panic, you probably just want to set your positions here in the or rather set your Zealots here in the middle line and just hold position rather than wasting time. But he does just kill the Nexus and recall out of there. So Panic is at a huge advantage at this game because he now basically will have a Nexus done where his opponent won't. He's dealing a lot of damage in the main because this wasn't perfectly dealt with by Ruin. If you have big warpins here, there's no way he's ever going to be able to get on top of that. And now your only goal is to hold the counterattack here. You can see the high number of Stalkers really weakens this army. So all Panic has to do is just hold. He needs to overcharge, and no, he decides to Time Warp instead. So Panic getting a pretty decent engagement here. As you can see, a lot of these units are not participating in the fight. They're just hitting the Nexus or workers back here that don't really matter. And Ruin knows that he just has to hold this and he wins the game, considering the damage is still being done over here in Ruin's main base. So Panic has to pull probes right now, but there were so many Stalkers here that they're never going to be able to kill these Immortals. The Immortals still stand, and Panic just crushes that army. So you can see the many different ways you can get ahead in PvP, and Ruin just has to GG there. So I thought that was a really cool build, a really cool timing that you can exploit on your opponents if they don't perfectly deal with harassment. So you can basically just drop off some Zealots here in the main, warp in some more, make him overreact to that. If he sends his army out there, if it's out of position, you can always kill the third base and then take your own. And if that's the case, he has one of two options. Either he plays from behind and he takes his own Nexus here, and if he doesn't perfectly deal with this attack in here, he's going to lose a lot. But he either plays from behind and he takes the Nexus, or he has to all-in you, which is what we saw to Ruin, and it just didn't work because Panic had the better Immortal count, he had the better upgrade timings, he had the better position most of all, and he could fight with his whole army and a Nexus cannon at the same time if he opted for it. So pretty cool play there out of Panic, and I hope you guys enjoyed.